we had Andrew come from behind the producer's desk back there and join us. We had Jen join us as we really just wrapped up our topic on parenting and
youth ministry, children's ministry.
Yeah. We got it all figured out.
So you know what the viewers want to know. Are you guys keeping your children's youth ministry?
No, we fired Jen. She's gone.
Jen's gone. And this is Drew's last.
Andrew's doing custodial work now.
Oh, okay.
So,
that's not true.
Hey, we're streaming. Awesome. You know,
All
Andrew. Right. Hey, you know, you gotta trust the man.
Oh, I trust him. You
gotta trust him. So I threw out to Ron last week. I said, hey, if you want a new topic, you want to choose the new topic, go for it. If not, I'll choose it. You know, and
I appreciate after 59 episodes, folks, that he's allowing me to choose the topic. Did we catch that?
No,
Did we catch that?
No.
59 episodes later.
Who picked the one on apologetics? The series on apologetics. Who was that?
Oh, that was me. Yeah, I forgot. That was a while ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I'm appreciative for the second time I'm allowed to choose a topic out of 59 episodes.
Yeah. So why don't you introduce our new topic, Ron? Because this is the one that you said, hey, I'd want to tackle this, and tell us why and where we're going.
Yeah. So serious topic, the Christian and mental health. The Christian and mental health. And,
I actually labeled or titled this podcast, Am I Crazy?
Yeah.
The Christian and mental health.
Yeah.
And generally my initial answer to that question is you probably are.
All of us are to some degree, right?
Yeah. So why this topic?
But this is something that there's been debate within Christian circles over the years as far as the place that mental health plays in the life of a believer, and we'll get into it. But the fact remains that so many people are struggling with mental health, whether it's depression, anxiety, OCD. Cutting disorders, bulimia, anorexia. I mean, these things go on. Gender dysphoria. If you look at the manual for mental health that the psychiatric world uses, I think the last time, and it's been a while, but there were like over 300 to 400 different labels, and there's probably a lot more now. Okay, so the question becomes, is this something that's just in the mind of people? Is this not real? Is this something that they're conjuring up? Are they using this as an excuse, right? And when it comes to the believer, I think there's been this historically this view of, well, one, you just need to trust God. You need to pray more. You need to have more faith, okay? And then you go to the other polar opposite. Hey, you need to go see a psychiatrist and get some medication for that, right? So again, like any topic, you're going to have polar opposites, and then you're going to have a balanced approach. I think if we're honest, all of us, and probably those watching, can probably name somebody that they know, either in their immediate family, extended family, or your social group that's struggling with some form of mental illness. So it's an important topic because as we're trying to do everything from a biblical basis, so what does the Bible say about this, right? How should the Christian and the church interact with people who are struggling with serious, mental health disorders? So that's why, and obviously I've been doing biblical counseling for a long time, and I've seen so many different cases all over the map. And I think in some cases the church has done a bad job in handling this, and in some cases they've done a good job in having the right view of how do I interact with Christians that are struggling with mental health. So it's a big topic, and it's not going away.
No, it's not. So let's just start. Let's just start with where we're at, and kind of hitting on what you were just kind of describing, just as far as the necessity for even this topic to be discussed.
Yeah.
So let's look at the stats. I got a video here. Let's go ahead and roll that, and then let's just talk about the landscape of where we are as a culture. So I got a video here that kind of lists some stats. Okay, so let's just walk through some of these statistics just so we kind of know where we're at. One of the things that stuck out to me in that video was this statement: the leading cause of disability in the United States is depression. Okay, so the depression conversation is a big one, right?
Yeah.
But then they go on, and actually these statistics are a few years old.
I was going to say, I was looking at the numbers saying some of these numbers are low.
So these are probably, these are on the low end of it.
Okay.
You could probably increase it
Yep.
By another few percentage points even today. But 1 in 5 say they have or have been diagnosed, and I don't know if they say, but if it's, I've been diagnosed with a mental health condition, but the statistic is 1 in 5, right? So 1 out of every 5 people has what they call a mental health condition. And when you talk about 1 in 25 adults has a serious mental health illness, right? So 1 out of every 25 people, they say, has this very serious mental health illness, which that number to me is pretty staggering.
Absolutely.
That seems like a really high number.
Yeah.
A serious mental health illness, I would think 1 in a few hundred.
Right.
We're talking 1 in 25 now.
Yep.
Almost 7%, and again, you might even be able to say today that 10% or higher. That number does seem low, actually, but major depression. Right. That's over 16 to 20 million people in the United States have what they call major depression. 2.6 have what they call bipolar disorder. So when on the spectrum of mental illness and mental health disorders, those are the ones you hear: depression, bipolar, anxiety. Right? Those are the 3 big ones, right? And I think even on the video we saw schizophrenia on the rise, which that can be a pretty scary mental health disorder in and of itself. But then we see suicide is the 10th cause of death. That's really high, right?
Yeah.
People taking their own lives. And then what I wanted to make mention of and just point the spotlight on a little bit is they had a statistic with youth and severe depression. And again, this is a few years old, but as of a few years ago, it increased from 5.9% of youth having severe depression to 8.2% increase in just over a 5-year period. So a few years later, you're probably talking anywhere probably from 10 to 15% of youth have what they call severe depression. So, so these are kids who just should be kids growing up, enjoying life without the pressures of adulthood, right? Like there's something about youth and being a child and even being a teenager where you don't have the pressures of life that should allow you the freedom to just, we as adults talk about, oh my word, to go back and be a child again, where your biggest struggle is, Tommy didn't sit next to me at lunch today, right? And I look at the issues my kids are going through. I'm like, man, if that's your biggest issue you have today, man, enjoy being this. But clearly, and what I wanted to point out, because it hit me, is there's this massive increase in all of these mental health disorders. And so it's either one of 2 things. It's either A, well, we're just now at a point where we're addressing it and diagnosing it and giving treatment for these mental disorders. Whereas in the years past, we didn't talk about it. It was kind of in the shadows. We didn't treat it properly. We didn't talk about it openly. And so perhaps there were just as many people years ago struggling with mental illness as there are today. It's just out in the open now, and we're talking about it. We're finally addressing it. And I certainly think there's some truth to that. But I don't think that answers the whole question.
No.
Why such a massive increase in mental health issues amongst not just Americans, but this is a global thing. But particularly, we're talking in the context of the United States here. Why is this increasing, and what's really going on? And so those are some of the questions we want to tackle and we want to get to. But we just wanted to lay the foundation of this is where we're at. It's major. You've been doing counseling for years, and the amount of people that are on medications. The amount of people that are trying to get treatment, it's staggering, and it's just getting higher and higher and higher. And so we're going to talk about why is that. Are the modern treatments, as we look at the pages of Scripture, can they work together or do they work against each other? Right? And you alluded to it in your opening, is mental illness becoming an excuse for unbiblical behavior? And so those are the areas we're going to get into. We'll take a few podcasts just to really delve into this, because I know people are interested and people want to talk about it.
Yeah.
They want to hear, hey, am I crazy? Am I sinning? Do I need to be on medication? Should I? And so, having said all that, obviously Ron and I are not licensed, clinical psychologists or medical doctors, right? We're theologians, and so we want to approach this from a theological perspective and give some spiritual insights and helps. With regard and some own personal opinion, just as we view the landscape of mental health as it exists in our congregations and really in our culture, our broader culture as well. So before we get into all of that, I have one more video I want to kind of throw out to you, and this is a woman talking about ADHD, hyperactive attention deficit disorder, in children. And my goal is not specifically to talk about ADHD, although we're going to get to that, I think, at some point. But she makes a few statements here. I just want to highlight, which will kind of lead us into some deeper discussions and some questions that are, I think, on everybody's mind.
Is a way to describe maladaptive coping, a way to talk about behaviors that aren't working well for kids. A lot of times parents will ask me how their child got a diagnosis or where mental illness comes from. And that's a really complicated question, but it comes down to nature versus nurture. And it's not really nature versus nurture, it's really nature and nurture. You need to have a genetic predisposition, and then your environment and different environmental stressors will bring out certain genetic predispositions. So I have a genetic predisposition for freckles, but when I sit in the sun, I get more freckles. Everyone has struggles, whether you meet criteria for a mental illness or not, or for an emotional problem or not. And the most important thing is for parents to be models of effective coping for their kid.
Okay, so she made a couple of statements there that I wanna drill into a little bit more. She used the term genetic predisposition toward mental illness. Okay. In this case, they were specifically talking about ADHD for children. And so she talked about that in the same way as a genetic predisposition toward freckles or skin color, right? So someone who is fair-skinned and has freckles, when you come out in the sun, you got to be aware of that because it's going to affect you, right? And as opposed to someone who's not. So the mental illness and the physiological issues, the modern kind of psychology says exactly what this woman was saying. Hey, they're not very different, okay? And people have a genetic predisposition, some people toward mental illness and some people don't. Now, growing up in, the 90s and the late 90s, going through my undergrad, we had some counseling classes within the degree that I took at the school I went to. Was a Bible college, and there was some confusion. There was a struggle over, hey, when people come to you, is mental illness really a thing? Is that a real thing that we can diagnose? Or, and this was kind of the tendency of the counseling classes that I went through in my undergrad, was, no, everything's just a result of sin. If you deal with the sin issue, you'll deal with their mental illness issue. So the first question I kind of want to throw out to you, is mental illness real? Or are mental illness symptoms simply a result of sin? Or are they a result of, no, I'm predisposed to this genetically, so I'm going to struggle with it?
Yeah, and this is where, okay, so the black and white answer is mental illness real? Yes. Now the debate comes into, why am I feeling this? And so this is, as you're saying, you go back when you were taking those courses, and I think this was kind of like the model of biblical counseling. If you go all the way back to Jay Adams in the 60s, Competent to Counsel, and it's like, okay, what sin is in your life? Okay, so Doug, you're in my office, you're depressed, okay? You don't want to get out of bed, you know? Steph gets you into my office, and it's like, oh, he just sleeps in, and he hardly eats, and right? Okay, someone said, well, he's clinically depressed, right? This medicine will help him feel better, okay? I start peeling back the layers with you, and I start finding out that, you know, there's some things going on in your life that Steph doesn't know about that are contrary to Scripture.
Yep.
Could the guilt of those behaviors cause you to be depressed? Absolutely, right? Absolutely.
Yep.
So there's one side of the coin. The danger when we talk about this topic is that people want to put people in one category, and you can't do that. Someone coming in with symptoms of a mental illness, and let's just use depression. The question becomes, where is that coming from? Could it be coming from behavior things that you are doing in your life, and for lack of a better word, you're bringing that depression on, right? Guilt, shame, and that can debilitate a person. Okay, but we got to stop and say, well, where's that coming from? Why is that happening in your life? Now, you take another person that comes in, same exact scenario, depressed, no motivation, no appetite, not feeling like doing anything. You peel the layers back. There's no secret sin. He's not hiding anything. As a matter of fact, up until the point of him falling into this depression, active in the community, job, playing with the kids, engaged, and all of a sudden it's like a light switch. Okay, what's going on there? I've seen dozens and dozens of both of those scenarios. So this way we can't pigeonhole and say, oh, no, it must be sin. Oh, nope, it must be something biological. He needs a script. We got to peel the layers back to get to the why.
Yeah, it does seem like when you try to answer that question, even the way the question's asked, you know, is it real or is it just, you know, all spiritual? Is it all physiological or is it all spiritual? And sometimes, you know, like when you stretch a rubber band and you cut it, you know, it goes to both ends. It seeم like that's what's happening in this situation. It's like
exactly.
Modern psychology is all physiological, give them a pill, and that's the only way we can treat it. You know, on the other end of the Christian perspective, it's like it's all, you know, spiritual. Just deal with spiritual. That'll fix everything. And so what I hear you saying is, you can't really approach it as an either or, but maybe as a both and.
There's a both and because, in your case, I'm just using you as an example, right? That first scenario, if there's behavior that is unbiblical and that's causing the guilt and the shame and the depression, right? That's certainly a heart issue, right? And that is going to affect you spiritually. So we can't, you know, we're mind, body, and soul. We can't separate them and put them in different categories. The other person that comes in, and he goes and gets testing done, and he finds out he has thyroid issues, and there's like, man, your thyroid is like malfunctioning. That's what's causing your deep depression. Now we have a biological reason, but it doesn't devoid him of the actions, the way he speaks to his wife, right? It doesn't excuse him from the way he interacts.
Chronic
he
pain,
still has a heart.
Chronic pain can create, you know, I've been dealing with chronic back pain, you know, for years and years and years, and it can create emotional, you know, stress on us, which causes us then to act in sinful ways toward.
Absolutely, and so I'm very leery when people try to divide these two and say, oh, this is happening exclusively because of this, right? We are intertwined. I use this silly example of, you know, somebody snaps, you know, I snap at Monique. And she was like, man, what's wrong with you? And it's like, well, I haven't eaten, right? What do we call that? Hangry, right? Okay, is there a biological feeling that I have because of not having food for like 18 hours? Yeah, you're going to be grumpy. You're going right. That's real. Like, so is that real? Or is that in my head?
Right.
Well, of course that's real. Does that justify she brushes by me and hits me and I go off on her? Well, it's just that I'm just tired and I'm hungry, right? So see, even in that silly example, what are we doing? We're saying it's not my fault that I did that.
Yeah.
It's because of this biological state I'm in.
Right.
And we got to be careful that we don't do that.
Yeah, so mental illness, or someone that's even been diagnosed with mental illness, do you see the tendency once a diagnosis is given to say, well, or to use that as an excuse for sinful behavior?
People can do that, and people have done that. Not all people do that, but people will do that.
Yeah.
And this is where, when I'm talking to someone who has a legitimate diagnosis, there is something biologically going on. You're on a medication, and now all of a sudden, anytime there's human interaction that is not biblical, well, you know I have.
Yeah.
Well, you know I have.
I suffer from anxiety, depression.
We got to be very careful with that, because, and I tell people, don't minimize the human dignity that you have as a person. You still have, by God's grace, it might be a lot harder for you to make decisions that are the right decisions, right? To interact with people in a way that is healthy. So don't just say, well, I can't because of this. And that's where the struggle comes in. Yeah, at least for me, doing pastoral counseling, trying to see how much of this is a heart issue and how much of this is they really are struggling with something that they can't even control, in a sense, because there might be something chemically going on here.
Yeah.
And that, it gets messy. It gets complicated. That's not an easy thing to discern.
Yeah. Well, and so do you agree that certain mental health disorders or illnesses are, some people are just predisposed?
Yeah.
So I was going to add more syllables. Predisposed to that genetically.
Well, and that's, I'm not a doctor, right? So what is all the biological lingo involved with that? To say someone is predisposed to a mental disorder, it depends on, again, I go back to the cause of that disorder. Is there a biological cause of that disorder, right? Is there, like what hyperthyroidism, and again, I'm not a doctor, but is there, that is a chemical problem in the body. Is it possible that my child could now inherit that same thing? Of course. And then that is what actually caused the low moods. Well, in that case, then there is a predisposition, right? But what I want to be careful of is when we make labels or we give labels to different mental health disorders for which there is not a biological basis, but it's purely based on behavior. Now, and this is where I think that's where the big debate is, right? So is there something on the cellular level that causes all of these different mental disorders?
So the way I've kind of wrestled through it a little bit is, why are some people why do some people have a tendency toward anger and others not, right? Some people, blow up.
Yeah.
And then other people clam up.
Yeah.
Right? They're two totally different responses to stress and stressful situations. But why does this person, why are they predisposed to this? Well, I come from a long line of yellers and blow up, and so we just automatically say, well, it's genetic. My dad, my granddad, we all kind of operated this way, and so therefore it's just my lot in life, right? And so, and I do say that some people have a tendency toward alcoholism, right? While others don't. So I do think there is something inherently genetic going on within us that some of us are drawn to certain sinful behaviors. while others aren't, and maybe they're drawn to other sinful behaviors while others aren't.
Right.
The hard part with mental illness is like you can get a diagnosis for any form of physiological illness. It's you have this disease, right? You have thyroid disease. We need to deal with that with medication or to remove it, right? It's not like you can take a blood test and say, okay, you have bipolar disorder, right?
It's going to be based on behavior.
When you go to clinical psychologists and you start talking, it's all describing symptoms that seem to correlate with this mental illness that's been described or been identified. I think that's a good word to use. But rarely, if any, do people, here, we're going to do a brain scan. Oh, and we can see, based on this brain scan, you have this. That's what becomes difficult. That's where the tension is.
It does because, again, in talking to people, there are a lot of people who, wait, you guys are having a conversation?
Okay, I saw that.
So, y'all done? All right. Thank you, Drew.
Yeah.
No,
we might have froze on YouTube. We might have a YouTube
no
issue.
problem. They'll come in the office and say, "Hey, my wife and I are having problems, whatever." And tell me a little bit about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I've been diagnosed with clinical depression.
Yeah.
I've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I've been, whatever the case is. And it's interesting. When I like to ask them the question, when were you diagnosed? And they'll tell me. And then the next question I'll ask them is, how were you diagnosed? Mm-hmm. How did they determine that?
Yeah.
I went to my psychiatrist. They asked me a series of questions. And based on the way I answered the evaluations, the questions, they said, well, you have clinical. And in some cases, and again, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not bashing the psychiatric world at all. I'm just telling you what people tell me, right? Who have been there, who have the diagnosis. I walked out with a prescription, and I've been on whatever it is. Now, how was that diagnosis made? It was made purely on the behaviors that person was describing. Okay, so so when we come back to the question and we say, well, is there something? We come back to your predisposed question, and we talk about, is there something genetically causing that? Are some people
disposed? We're struggling with that word.
Disposed to predisposed.
Predisposed.
I had that at one point.
I know, that's my fault.
I think this is a fair question. I don't know how I can answer that if I'm not looking at lab results.
Right.
It's all behavior. And so what we're doing, because, hey, well, here's the 10,000th person who's walked in and answered the questionnaire the same way, so he has it too.
Right.
Okay, we're still describing a behavior. Is there a biological background or foundation for why these guys are describing it the same way? I don't know how you can answer that if you've done no lab work.
Right.
That's and I think that's a fair question.
Yeah, and there's, to my knowledge, there's no lab work that at this point can be done to identify particular mental illness.
So and again, I don't know, because again, I'm not in the medical field. So, but all I'm saying is this. You could have someone, and that's why I go back to my example, using you as the example and another guy, the same symptoms coming from different root issues.
Yeah.
One's a biological, and one is purely behavioral in the example that I gave using you. So that's where this does become kind of layered, and you got to try to untangle and say, okay, what is what? Regardless of what both of those are, and this is my other point, you still have a heart.
Yep.
By God's grace, by accountability in your life, you can move in a direction relationally, behaviorally, that God desires despite where it's coming from. Right. That's my point.
Yeah.
And so
and anyway, for those who are watching, we did lose our video feed. It froze on us, but we still have our audio. So that's what we were trying to figure out here. So you can still listen. You just won't be able to see beautiful faces. So there's nothing wrong with your. If it froze there for a minute, and so we're just rolling the audio right now. I think there's an inherent danger, going kind of back to what we were saying in the beginning, toward this person comes in and they describe what seems to be the symptoms of bipolar disorder, so we're going to treat them for that. And by the way, there are treatments that are very effective for people that have been diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
Anxiety.
Right.
Depression.
I think the inherent danger, see if you agree with this, is when we automatically jump to some of the more common anxiety, depression. You go in, you talk to a psychologist, and you give these symptoms. Yep, anxiety, depression, and then the pharmaceutical companies they're jumping on you to purchase their drug that's going to make you happy, right? So what used to be called melancholy or sadness and things like that is now a clinical problem, all right? And I think we've jumped way too far in that direction with just take a pill and deal with your sadness, right? Take a pill and make you happy. It seems like there's just take a pill and it should fix you, right? And I'm not saying there isn't actually a place for some of those medications,
right.
But I wonder if they've become a crutch,
default.
Yeah, just a default. Let's just do this. Yep.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that, because, look, there are people who are dealing with this constant darkness and stuff in their life, and there are times where medication pulls them out of the darkness, and there's no hidden sin. There's no, well, you're cheating on your taxes, or you're having an affair, and no, like, that's not there. And again, I've seen dozens and dozens of people where they're going productive, engaged, and all of a sudden it's like a switch. So what is that, right? And then when they get on a medication, because they go in and give the symptoms, and they say, wow, it sounds like you're clinically depressed, and they give them something, they're right back in the saddle again. Yeah. They're active again, and so there is. And so when people say, well, it's just, no, there's something going on, I believe, biologically.
Yeah, and you and I both had situations where we've talked to people, and we've gone out of those meetings saying, what we're doing right now is completely ineffective until they get
absolutely
future medical help that's beyond what we can get.
Yes, they can't even process what we're saying, right?
Yep.
And so that being said, I do think, as you pull the camera back, our society is not so much interested in if there may be a heart issue. It's like, how do you feel? Oh, we have something for that.
Yeah, right.
And I do think that is happening, and I do think they're quick to just give a med, and I do think is driven by money.
Well, I think that's definitely a part of it.
We can't ignore that side of the coin, that is happening.
I think that when you talk about the medication, which it seems like that's just where I know there's other treatments and there's other exercises that psychologists say, hey, try this, do this. Meditation is one of them. Breathing exercises. It's not just medication, but medication is a big part of it.
Yeah,
I think modern psychology that eliminates any view of the spiritual tends to just mask behavior. And I think there's the limitation of kind of just modern psychology and medication. If it removes God from the equation, that's not the only issue I have with it, but if it just removes God from the equation, all we're doing is addressing behavior. We're not addressing the heart. So I think there's limitations there.
Right.
So I agree. There are times in which, the behavior is so erratic, so out of control, if you will, that we've got to intervene with something, right, to get you to a point where we can even have the conversation now about spiritual realities that may be playing a part here as well. And so that's why when we talk about the both and, I think that's important.
And there are times, again, and when I've talked with people who've come in with a diagnosis, they're on a prescription. As we start counseling, we start talking about the heart issues, their view of themselves their view of God,
Yep.
their view, and we start aligning that up with Scripture, that they, not me, but they will say, I don't think I need this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what I'm learning about how I've been viewing myself, I was in a really bad place, but now I don't know that I need to be on this anymore.
Because what we're doing more than just addressing external behavior, right? We're trying to get at the heart.
We're trying to get
of
to
it.
the root of it.
And I think
right?
you would agree, the reason we struggle with addiction or the reason we have mental illness is ultimately because of the curse of sin, right?
Yeah, absolutely. In a very broad sense, absolutely. Right? Sin, sickness has come into the world.
There's a spiritual component to all of this.
Right.
And when modern psychology removes that spiritual component
that's
and
a problem.
just addresses behavior,
that's
you're
a
not
problem.
addressing the full person.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think that's so that's why, again, as we started this conversation to try to dissect, well, that's it's intertwined, right? And it takes time, and you got to come alongside people and love them and hear them, and try to point them to where is this coming from.
So where we want to go from here, we want to talk. What does the Bible actually say about mental and emotional issues? And then we've talked and we've touched about biblical counseling. I want to get into that as we head into the future. What are the limitations of biblical counseling when it comes to mental health, right? Mm-hmm. And so we've kind of laid the foundation for those questions. Now, moving forward in our next podcast, we want to drill down deeper into those questions of, okay, what is actually the spiritual condition here that has to be addressed, and where, as a biblical counselor, am I limited? Mm-hmm. I mean, where have I reached the point where I have to say, you need to go talk to somebody else because I cannot help you with this any further.
Yeah.
And then I want to talk about how biblical counseling has changed over the years, because I think it has. I talked about my initial training and how it's kind of developed over the years to address mental illness. And then we want to get into some practical considerations about how has the church, I want to have a real honest conversation about how the church has hurt people with mental illness in the past, because the church doesn't necessarily have the best track record with this.
Right.
And I just want to be honest about that. I want to have an honest conversation with that. And then talk about practically how can the church now moving forward help people with mental illness. And then we as pastors, how are we equipped to counsel and help people with mental illness? And so when you sit down with your pastor, you sit down with one of us, and you're expecting, them to address these deep issues and these emotional struggles that you're going through, there are limitations there. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to get into what those limitations are and what point do we say, hey, we're done here with what we can do. You need to see someone else.
Yep.
Then I want to delve into a big topic as we move forward into this discussion on how does trauma affect mental health.
Yeah.
Because I think that's an issue that is huge. Yeah. And I think it plays a huge role in mental health and how we deal with and process past trauma. So that's where we're headed over the next
it's a
few
big topic.
podcasts.
That's going to be about 25 podcasts. Man.
Yeah. So we'll try and limit it to just a few, but it's a huge topic, and I think it's necessary, and so we're excited to continue to jump into it. As we head in through the month of August, we'll probably hit another podcast in a couple weeks. I know school's going to be starting up, as we head into the middle of this month, and staff in service and all of that happens. So our Friday morning podcast, most likely we're going to have to talk about it. We'll move to a different day. Right. But we'll inform everybody and let you know.
And let me just, because again, it's going to be a big topic, and as people are watching, let me just drop this theological truth on this issue, right? No matter what you've been diagnosed with, from a biblical standpoint, that diagnosis does not define who you are.
Yeah, that's huge.
And I think that is such an important theological truth to understand.
Because so many people wear it as an identity.
Absolutely. That is not who you are. So when people come to my office and say, I'm bipolar, I'm like, no, you're not. Mm-hmm. You're struggling with bipolar. You're a child of God. Mm-hmm. You've been redeemed, right? I'm talking to the Christian now, right? You're a royal priesthood. You're a joint heir with Christ. And that's no small thing.
Yep.
to your mental well-being.
Yep.
Viewing yourself in light of your struggle through the lens of Scripture. And that's something that we want to keep in front of our listeners and viewers.
Yeah.
Okay? A label does not define you. Christ defines who you are.
Yeah.
And there's so many people who struggle, and they allow the label to define who they are, and that actually produces bad mental health.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we'll talk more
Yeah,
about
it's a good
that.
word to end on. And thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us. And we will be back in probably 2 Fridays from now.
Sounds good.
And until then, have a great week.
All right.